Okay, so my name is Anastasia. I've been with the LaRouche Political Action Committee for, it'll be 6 years coming in November. And we're definitely in a very, you can call it a precious moment in history, where you have there's a choice between us and what we're going to decide to do with people in this room and the people outside of this room on what the destiny of mankind is going to be. And it can either go in the direction, which we were just talking about with the BRICS, these nations who just came together around the better aims of mankind and basing an economy on the conceptions of the human mind, that the human mind is what determines economic progress and development, versus what you have as a dying British imperial empire, which right now, through its desperation and what these nations of Brazil, Russia, India, China, who are explicitly working with LaRouche and our movement and what our ideas represent, they're trying to destroy this kind of potential. So we were just bringing up before I started this broadcast, you just had, you have to wonder, there's like certain questions we got to think about, like why this kind of, why the United States is seemingly so stuck in clinging on to a dead system. So, you look at our Congress, they just voted 270 to 100 and something to give $500 million to the Free Syrian terrorists to fight our good terrorists, to fight the bad terrorists, to have the Saudis train them. Just totally insane, totally nuts. And then just a few days after that, Poroshenko comes over from Ukraine, who's this Nazi coup president, having a joint congressional meeting asking for the United States to join. Why the United States is seemingly so stuck and clinging on to a dead system. You look at our Congress, they just, I don't know what it's doing. Never done that before. Okay, well, I'll just go with that. I muted it. Okay. We'll just hope it turns out okay. We'll love that one. So Poroshenko coming over and saying the U.S. needs to get involved and more nations need to get involved so they can overthrow the Russian imperialism, which we know already this is coming from the top, from a dying empire which wants to destroy these conceptions and wants to destroy the potential to bring about a world where people can actually be human. This is going to mean World War III in all of its hellfire. So I wanted to look at that, in particular, this question and why our congressmen are a bunch of whores, and look at a particular this battle between these two systems of thought, and really it's an idea of what man is to the universe, your relationship to man and the universe, and it goes back to two philosophical thinkers, one called Aristotle, another one called Plato. And Plato has the idea that mankind has innate qualities to understand the universe. And Aristotle views mankind as nothing more than a beast, nothing better than a beast, not too much better than a beast. And you can't really come to know principle. And there's been a fight back and forth between those ideas, but the United States was built off of that conception of Plato, that man has innate qualities to understand God, really. Understand God, understand the universe, that he's not just subservient to the powers that be. And I wanted to look at a particular fight between Leibniz and John Locke, Gottfried Leibniz. He was a scientist, a philosopher, politician, kind of a very well-rounded person. And let me show you a picture of him. No, not that. There's a picture of him. He's got a nice wig. There's Leibniz. And then, where's Locke? And here's John Locke. And they were both contemporaries. They're both alive at the same time.
What's the one that thinks
this one, John Locke, yeah. Yeah, we're going to look at both of the way they think. Because what you're taught, even when I was taught in high school in American history, you're taught that this guy was the founder of the Constitution. You're taught that this guy is the one that was the philosophical substance of what our founding fathers created as a nation. So we're gonna take a look at that and smash it to pieces.
Was this ours, or was it the British? What was their? You know, they had Magna Carta. Was this the connection, or was that?
I don't know.
Something different.
I don't know. I don't know about that.
No, the Magna Carta was way before the Constitution.
Oh.
It was like 12 or 1300, I think. 13th century.
So actually, I'm going to keep the picture up for Leibniz because he's nice to look at. Actually, I wanted to pass around something kind of fun. I was going to send these guys, these are postcards I got from DC, and I didn't send them. I had one for Seattle, this one's for Seattle, and this one was for my parents. But the one that has the U.S. Constitution on it, was it this one? No, okay, it was the Declaration of Independence. The one that has the Declaration of Independence on it explicitly pushes this line that John Locke, the philosophies of John Locke, were the people, or was what created the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. So anyway, people can take a look at it. Yeah, we're gonna take a look at it.
Is that why you held on to it?
That's why I didn't send them. Yeah, because I was like, no, I can't send this. I gotta keep this and show it. I gotta keep this and show it. That's why I didn't send them. But I mean, that's just, you know, they call it the Enlightenment, the period of Enlightenment. And I've actually Leibniz. There's some more papers to pass around here. So Leibniz is 1646. He's born 1646, I think. Let me flip over to it. Yep, 1646. And he dies 1716. And you must give a really brief history for folks who don't know too much about him. He becomes the Privy Councillor. The papers I just passed around was some papers from Locke. Here's some papers from Leibniz. So he ends up becoming the Privy Councillor. I'm going to skip over about 50 years of his life. To the second in line for the Queen of England. the second in line for the Queen of England. He becomes the Privy Councillor of Justice for Peter the Great of Russia. Because it wasn't called Russia at the time. And he also becomes, there's one other that I'm missing, but I can't put my finger on it right now. He ends up creating 3 different academies, one in Berlin, another in Vienna, and another one in St. Petersburg. And these academies were the first academies where they actually unified the arts and the sciences, which was unheard of. You always went to separate schools to do these kinds of things. And he thought of these things. There was just so many wars at the time over religion, over different chunks of the churches, and there's all these Aristotelian laws and ideas that are being pushed around. And his view in unifying knowledge in this way is that this would be a way of unifying the churches. This would be a way of getting rid of this strife. And he takes on a lot of the popular thinkers at the time, and John Locke was a big one. He was super popular. And what I wanted to do was to kind of give an idea. You were passing around the postcard. I wanted to just kind of read. You guys ever read the Declaration of Independence before? Yeah. Yeah, I'm just going to read that, just the beginning of that, and the first grievance, and then the preamble, which is very short. Just so people have a sense of the principle which this nation was actually founded on. So, the Declaration of Independence. Action of Second Continental Congress, July 4th, 1776. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare that causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Remember that part. It's very important. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just power from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter it or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience has shewn that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty, to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having a direct object, the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. And here's the first grievance. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. kind of funny because you're always taught in school too that the reason why the colonies overthrew Britain was because of the taxes. Hard taxes. They just want my money. No. He has refused his assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. And then here's the preamble to the Constitution. The Constitution of the United States of America. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. So that's the beginning of our Constitution. And kind of gives people a sense of what the principle of the nation was built on. So let's look at what this guy Locke says. What do I do with that? This guy was a proficient or prolific writer. This is the whole thing of the Second Treatise of Government. But we're just going to look at a little bit of what he says. And I want you to open up to where it says Chapter 1. This is... Yeah.
He said he created the academies to create a unity amongst nations.
Yeah.
So it was the Russian Academy of Berlin. What was the third one?
Vienna.
Vienna.
Mm-hmm.
He was born right around the end of the 30 Years' War.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that left a bad taste in the mouths of people from that standpoint of the religious conflict.
Yeah. Well, it was kind of funny because the whole reason he was trying to get to France for his own reasons, for his own personal reasons. But the reason why he was sent to France, he was sent by a baron who he was working for from Germany to go and talk to the King of England to tell him not to invade their country over a religious conflict, I'm pretty sure. And so for his own reasons of wanting to stop this kind of stuff, but also there was just a lot of very strong political and scientific figures in France at the time who he ended up getting in touch with. I don't think he actually succeeded in stopping them from going into Germany, but it opened up for him a lot more opportunities to do things like creating these academies. He was really sick of that kind of stuff.
Did you get that as the guy that writes that big bio on Leibniz, like A10 or whatever?
I didn't read him.
Oh, okay.
No, I just kind of got that from discussions I had with David Shaven and some of the work he had done in looking at Leibniz and what he was doing while he was traveling around France and Germany and whatnot and creating these institutions. So I thought it was a really interesting insight. If you think about, why would you create a whole new academy which unifies art and science when it's totally not normal of the times to do something like that, It seems it'll almost seem random if you didn't have a certain intention behind it. So back to John Locke. Leibniz he writes a refutation of John Locke, but it's not to this particular paper, but this particular paper I think gives, found the quickest idea for what he's talking about. The one that Leibniz refutes is called On Human Understanding. And anyway, it's pretty long. It's I printed out the table of contents for it. It's a pretty long essay. I wouldn't call it an essay. So anyway, so chapter 1, you guys can look at the table of contents of it at some point tonight. So chapter 1, part 2. Can I get a reader?
I can read.
All right.
Okay. For this purpose, I think it may be worthwhile to state what I think political power is, so that the power of a government official over a subject can be distinguished from that of a father over his children, a master over his servant, and a husband over his wife, and a lord over his slave. Because it sometimes happens that one man has all these different powers. We can get clear about how the powers differ by looking at the different relationships in which the man stands as ruler of a commonwealth, father of a family, and captain of a galley.
Keep going.
Okay. So, I take political power to be a right to make laws, with the death penalty and consequently all lesser penalties, for regulating and preserving property, and to employ the force of the community in enforcing such laws and defending the Commonwealth from external attack, all this being only for the public good.
Okay. Okay. All right, John Locke. See what else you got. So then he goes into another part called the state of war. So the first part he had chapter 1, chapter 2, you have chapter 2 on the state of nature. Chapter 3 is on the state of war. And can I get a reader to read from 16 to 18? Okay.
State of war.
Yes.
Chapter 3, the state of war. The state of war is a state of enmity and destruction. So when someone declares by word or action, not in a sudden outburst of rage, but as a matter of calm, settled design, that he intends to end another man's life, he puts himself into a state of war against the other person. And he thereby exposes his life to the risk of falling to the power of the other person, or anyone that joins with him in his defense and takes up his quarrel. For it is reasonable and just that I should have a right to destroy anything that threatens me with destruction, because the fundamental law of nature says that men are to be preserved as much as possible, and that when not everyone can be preserved, the safety of the innocent is to be preferred. In line with this, I may destroy a man who makes war on me, or has revealed himself as an enemy to my life, for the same reason that I may kill a wolf or a lion. Because such men are not under the ties of the common law of reason, have no rule except that of force and violence, and so may be treated as beasts of prey, dangerous creatures that will certainly destroy me if I fall into their power. So it comes about that someone who tries to get another man into his absolute power thereby puts himself into a state of war with the other. For such an attempt amounts to a declaration of a plan against the life of the other man. If someone wants to get me into his power without my consent, I have reason to conclude that would use me as he pleased when he got me there, and would destroy me if he wanted to. For no one can want to have me in his absolute power, unless it's to compel me by force to something that is against the right of my freedom. In other words, to make me a slave. To be sure of my own survival, I must be free from such force. And reason tells me to look on him, the person who wants me in his power, as an enemy to my survival, wanting to take away the freedom that is offensive, that is defense to it. So someone who tries to enslave me thereby puts himself into a state of war with me. Someone wants to take away the freedom of someone else, must be supposed to have a plan to take away everything else from the person, because freedom is the foundation of all the rest. That holds in a commonwealth as well as in the state of nature. Can I read the next part, please?
Yeah, the next part is the zinger.
Okay. This makes it lawful for me to kill a thief who hasn't done me any harm or declared any plan against my life, other than using force to get me in his power, so as to take away my money or whatever else he wants. No matter what he claims he is up to, he is using force without right to get me into his power. So I have no reason to think that he won't, when he has me in his power, take everything else away from me as well as my liberty. So it is lawful for me to treat him as someone who has put himself into a state of war with me. In other words, to kill him if I can. But that is the risk he ran when he started a war in which he is the aggressor.
I just want to ask what you guys think about this so far.
I can actually see his influence in American society.
Yep.
It's very obvious through castle doctrine, the fact that we can shoot somebody for coming into our home just because they're there, because this guy said so.
Your right to property.
Not even when he doesn't feel threatened, like he says, like it's not even, I don't even have to feel threatened for me to kill him. It's like,
If I were to take your shoe.
Else, tries to, do something to your child or something, I understand, like to protect, but he's talking about something completely different. He's talking about materialistic things,
Mm-hmm.
like someone's life. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
It actually reminds me of the argument for balancing budget that you get from a lot of these fiscal conservatives. Because they always use the argument, when you run your household, you don't spend more than you take in.
Mm-hmm.
They always make that argument that running the nation is like running the household. But that's a fraud. Running a nation is a lot more complicated than running a household. Running a nation is a much higher responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot more to consider, a lot more involved in running a nation than running a household. So it's got like this kind of little man mentality that's really used to kind of get people thinking at a very small level. To me, that's when he talks about freedom and liberty, it is this individual idea. The idea of freedom is the individual being free to act and do as he chooses. But you're not placing the individual in the context of the society you're existing in. And the fact that a lot of our freedoms are defined socially. So to me, it's a very infantile idea, the way he's talking about war, because ultimately he's talking about war between nations and states.
Yeah, right.
This is not about I'm gonna punch this guy next to me.
I'm gonna take your glasses.
It's just childish. I'm really shocked at how baldly childish it is. And somehow this inspired the creation of our nation? This is infantile.
Well, maybe there was another time back in the days, a couple of centuries, people got killed for weekend at the wife or something.
But I mean, the thing is that there is insecurity. There are even in this world. I mean, I talk to rural people, and they're not as secure because you're more isolated. If somebody does intrude onto your property, you can call a sheriff. You should have a gun. That's not, how you handle yourself as an individual, your property, and all this stuff at an individual level. It's not like how you handle affairs of state. It's not the same. One is a a nation is a much higher magnitude than an individual. And how you deal with your property and your money. So it just seems childish.
I'm going to read what John, because when John Locke, he actually ended up becoming, he was appointed the Commissioner of Trade in 1696. And he created what was called the Navigation Act. So let's see what his principles actually represented for the colonies. So he writes, or in the Navigation Act in 1696, they were not allowed to have their public currency any longer, because the colonies started getting. Let me pull this up. They started uttering. It was called the pine tree shilling. They had their own currency, and they were using this as trade amongst the colonies for economic progress, for funding projects. Like they developed things like the ironworks. They used this kind of credit to do that. This is the actual American credit system. So first thing first that Locke did was shut that down. No, you can't do that anymore. Next thing, requiring all colonial governors and commanders-in-chief to take a solemn oath to enforce the letter of the law upon the penalty of a massive fine and removal from office. Granting customs officials broad powers of search and seizure. Declaring that all colonial laws, bylaws, usages, or customs contrary to the act are illegal, null and void to all intents and purposes whatsoever. Authorizing customs officials to constitute and appoint such and so many officers of the customs in any city, town, river, port, harbor, or creek, when and as often as them shall seem needful. Permitting juryless vice admiralty court to try cases arising under the act. Explicitly prohibiting colonial trade with Scotland and Ireland, along with any foreign countries, unless the same have been first landed in the Kingdom of England, Dominion of Wales, or town of Berwick upon Tweed, and paid the rates and duties wherewith, they are chargeable by law under the penalty of the forfeiture of the ship and goods. This one?
Yeah.
Explicitly prohibiting colonial trade with Scotland and Ireland, along with all foreign countries, unless the same have been first landed in the Kingdom of England, Dominion of Wales, or town of Berwick upon Tweed, and paid the rates and duties wherewith they are chargeable by law under the penalty of the forfeiture of the ship and goods.
That's free trade.
Yep. So this is John Locke. This is what he actually instituted as laws against the colonies. And this was right after, because in 1688, you had, where's this guy? Let's find him. 1688. No. Maybe I saved it in here. Oh, there he is. You had William of Orange. There he is, showing a little leg. Yeah. Yeah, he invades. There's already been conflict between the colonies in England, or sorry, the colonies and the Dutch for a while now. And then finally, William of Orange invades England and brings in the Anglo-Dutch Empire in 1688. And he becomes, it's not even like they become like this weird, like, sister monarchy. It's not, I don't really quite understand it. It's not like they just overthrew the monarchy. It's like they became a sister monarchy, which he was really in power. So guess what? The colonies were no longer getting backed up by Queen Anne or other monarchs who actually had supported them and who were working with Leibniz. Queen Anne, who just before she died, she was the one that was in full support of the colonies and what they were doing and allowed them their sovereignty and their charter. When she died, brought in the person who Leibniz was working for at the time. Her name was the Electress Sophie. She was the next in line to be the next Queen of England, but she dies shortly after. So anyway, so there's like this huge succession of like these higher ups just dying like out of nowhere, and they were really freaked out because if the Electress Sophie was brought in, then sure enough Leibniz probably would have been the prime minister or something. He would have been higher up of economic policy in England. So after Sophie died, they brought in her son, George, who hated Leibniz. There was this whole slander around Leibniz saying that he plagiarized the calculus. This was this whole fight between Newton. Newton really didn't discover shit. Leibniz was, and he proves it. But anyway, so then William of Orange comes in, and bring up Leibniz again. I'm going to look at the leg of William of Orange. So Leibniz is still alive. They're still organizing in England. They're still organizing the colonies. You got Jonathan Swift, who is organizing up a storm over in England. And Leibniz does do a refute of Locke. I'm trying to think of which one would be best to do first. But I think I'd like to just read how Leibniz had refuted John Locke. And there's just a little, I couldn't actually find the paper. I couldn't just like grab the paper like I did with these other ones. So I'm just going to have to read the excerpt that I have here. So he does this. He's got a preface to it, and it's actually a dialogue. It's a Socratic dialogue that he does on the innate powers of the human mind. There's innate principles within the human mind to understand God. And he does a whole dialogue where he proves it. And but in the preface, he goes through point by point and just totally debunks Locke. And so I'll just read a part where I thought that he was just the most concise. So he says, this is Leibniz. So he says, therefore, the wisest men do not commit themselves to it as not to try to discover, if possible, something of the reason of this fact in order to judge when it is necessary to make exceptions. For reason is alone capable of establishing sure rules, and supplying what is wanting to those which were not such by inserting their exceptions, and of finding at length certain connections in the force of necessary consequences, which often furnish the means of foreseeing the result without the necessity of experiencing the sense connections of images to which the brutes are reduced, so that which justifies the internal principles of necessary truths also distinguishes man from the brutes. Perhaps our clever author will not wholly differ from my view, for after having employed the whole of his first book in rejecting innate intelligence, when in a certain sense he admits that ideas, which do not originate in sensation, come from reflection. Now reflection is nothing else than attention to what is in us, and the senses do not give us what we already carry with us. That being so, can it be denied that there is much that is innate in our mind, since we are innate, so to speak, in ourselves? And that there is in us being, unity, substance, duration, change, action, perception, pleasure, and 1,000 other objects of our intellectual ideas. And these objects, being immediate to our understanding and always persistent, although they cannot always be perceived by reason of our distractions and needs. What wonder that we say that these ideas, with all depending upon them, are innate in us. I have made use also of the comparison of a block of marble, which has veins, rather than of a block of marble wholly even, or of blank tablets, i.e. of what is called among philosophers a tabula rasa. And so this is the real zinger and what he gets at with Locke. He says, for if the soul resembled these blank tablets, truth would be in us as the figure of Hercules is in the marble, when the marble is wholly indifferent in the reception of its figure or some other. But if there were veins in the block which should indicate the figure of Hercules, rather than other figures, this block would be more determined thereto, and Hercules would be in it, as in some sense innate, although it would be needed to labor to discover these veins, to clear them by polishing and by cutting away what prevents them from appearing. Thus it is that ideas and truths are for us innate, as inclinations, dispositions, habits, or natural potentialities, and not as actions. Oh, these potentialities are always accompanied by some actions, often insensible, which correspond to them. Very different from how Locke describes his laws of nature and the laws of war, man in perpetual war if somebody comes up and hits you in the face or something. It is a very different idea, because if you actually think that man can understand universal principles and there's something within him that can do that, then you're thinking of man as not just something that can just react to something else, but it's actually something which can create something else.
With the tabula rasa,
Mm-hmm.
that Locke formulated that idea, right?
The tabula rasa,
Yeah.
He does talk about it.
Yeah. I don't know. I think he might have coined that term, but that.
No, it was Aristotle.
Well, yeah, but he's tied to Aristotle. I don't know. Did Aristotle say that?
Yeah.
Aristotle,
He did.
yeah.
Because Aristotle's idea of knowledge is abstraction. Aristotle's idea is that you have all these experiences, and like through the accumulation of experiences, if you have like the same set of experiences, you abstract the idea from the experience. Like, for example, a cup. You have an abstract idea of a cup. But the idea comes from you experiencing the cup, using the cup, or the chair, or love, or whatever. So that's how you form ideas, according to Aristotle.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea, though, is it comes from experience, which is not what Leibniz is saying at all. He's saying something else.
And he would say you wouldn't even have to experience something to know it to be true.
He's also getting at the innate qualities in the human mind of these ideas. It's already in us.
Mm-hmm.
That this thing with the Hercules sculpture sounds like this poetic way of trying to get that across. I'd have to look at it again. What did you read that from?
This is
Did you write it up for your release?
Yeah. This is the preface. I unfortunately don't have the date here when he wrote it. It's a an excerpt from a larger book that I printed out when I was out in Virginia. But this is the preface. To Critique of Locke. So it's Leibniz Critique of Locke. It's pretty simple, but from the preface, it actually leads into a discussion, a Socratic dialogue, like what Plato does. He describes how he was pressured by his friends to do it. His friends are saying, look, you have to do this, you have to do it, you've got a great mind, you should do this before you die.
When did he write?
I don't know. I don't have the date on here. I might be able to. I can probably tell you after the class, because I've got a list of all the things that he wrote and their dates, but it's somewhere in my notebook, so I can tell you afterwards. What?
So this idea of like the veins of Hercules, that it's more determined to take on that form than something random. Is he saying that versus the tabula rasa, that what's innate within like my soul has a certain striving or determination towards something? It's not just random. It's like, or what is it? I'm not sure what to.
I can read it again.
Okay, or if you just want to give your own thoughts or both or whatever.
I can read it again.
Okay.
For if the soul resembled these blank tablets, truth would be in us as the figure of Hercules is in the marble, when the marble is wholly indifferent to the reception of the figure or some other. But if there were veins in the block, which should indicate the figure of Hercules rather than other figures, the block would be more determined thereto, and Hercules would be in it as in some sense innate, although it would be needful to labor to discover these veins, to clear them by polishing and by cutting away what prevents them from appearing. Yeah, so as a sculptor, it's not like the medium's just all one block. There's something within the medium which is already there that you use to sculpt. And that's what he's talking about with these veins. And so you would use those veins to actually create Hercules. So he described that as the mind. And you're saying there's already something there in which you'd be able to discover what's already in there.
Not without labor.
Not without labor. Not without labor. And cutting away. Yeah, you definitely, I don't know if you ever tried sculpting before, or even something with like as delicate as marble, but it has these veins in it, and you can't just like make it do. You can't just like be like a grunt and like hit it and it does what you want it to do. You have to work with the medium. Anyway, so that's how he's describing the mind.
That's why I don't do it.
That's why you use Sharpies, right? So I want to look at one other thing, which Leibniz wrote, which is one of my favorite pieces. I don't have it on me. I have to grab one of those things. It's a very short paper, but I just want to read one part of it. It's a very short paper, and people should feel free to read the whole thing because it's very good. It's entitled Leibniz's First Writing on Society and Economy. And the part that I want, this one isn't highlighted. Is the one that I have highlighted, is that the one that starts with one might object?
Yeah.
Okay. So, can I get a reader for that chunk there?
I'll read. Does everybody see it? Where it is? Yeah. Okay, so this is Leibniz's first writing on society and economy. One might object that artisans today out of necessity, that artisans today work out of necessity. If all their needs were satisfied, then they would do no work at all. I, however, maintain the contrary, that they would be glad to do more than they now do out of necessity. For, first of all, if a man is unsure of his sustenance, he has neither the heart nor the spirit for anything, will only produce as much as he expects to sell, which is not very much given his few customers, concerns himself with trivialities, and does not have the heart to undertake anything new and important. He thus earns little, must often drink to excess, merely in order to dull his own sense of desperation and drown his sorrows, and is tormented by the malice of his journeyman. But it will be different there. Each will be glad to work because he knows what he has to do. Never will he be involuntarily idle, as he is now, since no one will work for himself, but rather jointly.
Okay. So I just want to go back to what these nations, the BRICS, are doing from that standpoint. That you have nations that are coming together that are working for the betterment of each other and not merely for the monetary gain or the pleasurable gain, the screwing over gain amongst each other. But they're actually coming together to produce something better than what one could do by themselves. And that same principle is also being applied here in the United States, whether people can see it or not. But it is here. This is where the idea was actually brought to fruition. It's the American system. And I want to just, as the last part of this class, I don't know if folks have had the opportunity to watch this whole thing. It's a press conference which was done with quite a few of our allies, with Congressman Walter Jones from North Carolina, who has denounced his own party, quite frankly. He's a Republican. Congressman Lynch, who's a Democrat from, is that right? He's a Democrat from Massachusetts. I think also Massey was there as well, which I forget where he's from. Kentucky. He's a Republican. And then also these families, which you can see the mother and the two children there, and the two gentlemen. These are families of who lost loved ones in 9/11. And they're doing this press conference on the release of the 28 pages from the 9/11 report, which would reveal that we've been covering up this whole time for the Saudis, that they've been arming and funding Al-Qaeda going all the way back to 2001. And so this is coming out now while we're giving money to these guys publicly. So I just wanted to show the testimony of one of these family members, which is actually very good, and I thought represented this principle pretty well. Oh, I forgot to plug her in. Let's see. Full time for the Saudis that they've been arming and funding Al-Qaeda. Sorry, this is the stupid YouTube thing is still going. Sorry, I'm new to this Google Hangout thing, so I'm just going to stop it.
You can mute it on that side.
I can mute it on this side?